Welcome to this episode of Legal Angle with Emmanuel, the Law Olawale. Today we're going to be talking about domestic violence. This is a topic that is very current and present in many homes and relationships, more than we would like to admit. My guest today is the Judge Michael King. He's a man who has been presiding over the Franklin County Court of a municipal court since March of this year. I call his court the King's Court. Welcome to the show, Judge King.
Thank you, Emmanuel. I appreciate the invitation, and I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. I know your experience having worked as a law director for my current hometown, the village of Granville, and prior to that too, you've worked as an appellate and trial attorney for a private law firm. But I would like you to let the people know more about you by you reintroducing yourself to those who have never met you.
Sure, thank you. I appreciate that very much. I'm happy to hear that you have moved to my adopted hometown of Granville. It's a great community, and I know you'll love it there. Yeah, I did spend almost 10 years as the law director and prosecutor in Granville. I started out as the assistant law director and prosecutor for 3 years before that. So I spent quite a lot of time working with the good folks out there. I actually got married in Granville. I got married at the Brindle Mansion a few years ago. So my background, yeah, by training, I'm a trial lawyer. So I spent 10 years at a big law firm. My first job out of law school was as a law clerk in our Court of Common Pleas for Judge Lisa Sadler. So for 2 years, my office was inside the courtroom, and I got to see a lot of trials, got to see a lot of trial lawyers. I helped the judge write decisions. I helped her make evidentiary rulings. I sequestered a couple of death penalty juries during my clerkship. It was just a great experience. So I always said that was the best job I ever had, but each one just kept getting better. And so now I'm again in the best job I've ever had. Our court is the busiest court in the state of Ohio. As a municipal court, we deal with all misdemeanor criminal matters, misdemeanor traffic matters. And on the civil side, we deal with civil cases where the amount in controversy is $15,000 or less. But by far, the thing that I do the most every day is handle misdemeanor criminal cases. And I would say easily the primary type of case that I see and my colleagues see on a regular basis are domestic violence and assault cases. As you pointed out in the opening, there's a lot of it going on in our community and probably nationwide.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Mhm.
I'm looking at your prior history working as a law director and a prosecutor for the village of Granville,
Mhm.
and you just got appointed to the court this year in March.
I did.
Yeah, what was the transition like for you? How did you feel when you got that call from the governor?
I will never forget that day when I got that call because it reminded me of the day my son was born. And I say that because, your initial reaction is one of, joy and excitement. And then almost immediately you have that profound sense of responsibility. And I can tell you honestly, I've not heard my alarm since that day. It has been absolutely amazing. I was so welcomed at our court by every other judge I work with. We have great people there. I have an amazing bailiff. We have a great group of public defenders, prosecutors, private counsel. I mean, everybody who comes in and out of our courthouse is there to serve in one capacity or another. And so that to me was just such a welcoming environment, made the transition a lot easier. Having spent 10 years as a municipal law director and prosecutor, and then having been, in private practice before that, the substance of the law was nothing new to me. None of what I've seen in the last 3 months has been anything that I've had to go back and start, from scratch and learn over again. But it's just it's been a different kind of volume. It is, like I said, we're the busiest court in Ohio, and I've had days where my docket is over 100 cases. So it's just you're moving, and every case requires, in my view, full attention. And so I'm at my desk most days by 7:30. and I'm often there late. I was there today, even though our court is closed. Yeah, I love it. The transition to me was, you'd have to ask everybody else how I'm doing, but I feel good about
Court welcome the king.
it.
So let's go back to how this all started. How did you decide to become an attorney?
That kind of ties in a little bit to what we're talking about today and the topic of your program. So, to go do a little bit of a deep dive, if it's okay. So, I grew up, my mom always said, we're where we're meant to be, right? We've heard this, you're where you're meant to be. My mom said that all the time when I was a kid. And I kind of didn't believe her because we were in Toledo, we were poor. My dad was an abusive alcoholic, right? And as a little kid, in my brain, it was kind of hard to reconcile that with my mom's positive, affirmation of you're where you're meant to be. And so, what I wanted most growing up was to be anywhere but where I was. And I was really fortunate to have some good public schools and some good teachers and counselors who looked out for me and recognized some talent in me and made sure that I had an opportunity to go to Ohio State University. So I came to Ohio State as a freshman after high school. And in all honesty, I felt like, and I still feel like Columbus sort of adopted me. I've never, in 30 years, I've never lived more than 3 miles from where I'm sitting. I love this city. I love this community. As I work my way through Ohio State, both working full time, parking cars at the Hyatt and Capitol Square, and going to school full time, I saw this community around me, and I saw the best way to be a part of it was to go on to law school and try to be, part of the leadership of our community. So that's what really led me to apply to law school. Um, and then from there, it just has been one, you know, not just lucky opportunity, people, offering me opportunities, and then just working hard to make it successful. So it's been good.
That's very incredible. Use your childhood trauma as a pedestal to lead you to where you are. That's really
Yeah,
inspiring.
yeah, and it's funny how that kept coming back because if so, I don't think I ever heard the phrase domestic violence until I was an adult, right? But I knew what it was, right? And if you know anybody who has survived domestic violence in any capacity, whether it's as a kid, as a spouse, as a parent, if you know anybody who has survived that, you carry that with you, right? You carry those experiences with you, and they just continue to affect your life in ways that you sometimes don't anticipate. And for me, there was always this desire to kind of turn that into something positive. And the first thing I did with that is my entire time at Ohio State in law school, I volunteered as a guardian ad litem for kids in abuse and neglect cases. My law degree has the notation public service fellow because of the hours I spent volunteering in those cases. Uh, and then a few years ago, about 5 years ago now, I guess, I got a phone call. There was a woman, a school teacher, whose husband had beaten her pretty severely, put her in the hospital, uh, broken bones in her face. She went to the domestic clinic at Capitol Law School to get help seeking a divorce. And when she did that, he filed a counterclaim in the divorce, seeking half of her teacher retirement account and half of a home that she owned before the marriage. And so a friend of mine at the time ran the domestic clinic at Capitol. And I remember him telling me that he would get those things because in divorce cases in Ohio, the court isn't looking at who did what, it's just dividing assets. And he said as far as those claims went, it didn't matter who did what. And so he asked if there was anything I could do to help her. And I didn't know that I could, honestly. Number one, it wasn't my area of law. Number two, I was working as law director. I still had my private practice and I was doing a lot of pro bono work. But I initially turned it down, but nobody would help her. And so I got another call, and the request was, hey, look, she's approaching a statute of limitations. We can't find anyone to help her. Will you at least meet with her? And so I said, sure, I'll meet with her. So I sat with her and she told me her story of what happened. And I'm taking notes, and part of me is I can see the story because it's something that I experienced as a kid. And I kind of heard my mom in my ear, saying, if you can help, you should help. And so I told her honestly that I didn't know what kind of help I would be able to offer. um, I spent a weekend doing research. I couldn't find a single case in Ohio history where a spouse had raised an independent claim against a spouse outside of a divorce. But I did find some case law from the early 80s, oddly enough, in the insurance context involving collusion between spouses, that told me that, in my view, Ohio law supported that. And so I met with her again and I said, look, I'm willing to help you. I can file this, but your husband is almost certainly going to file a motion to dismiss, arguing that you can't do that. And if we get past that, discovery is going to be difficult. And if we get through that, and eventually if we reach a judgment, he doesn't have a lot of assets from what I can tell, and he may try to discharge it in bankruptcy anyway. So it's a lot to go through for not much of a return at the other end. And I'll never forget, she said, I understand all of those things, but they don't matter. She said, I need somebody to say that what he did was not okay. So what are you going to do with that, right? So I drafted a pretty detailed complaint and I filed it. And just as I had predicted, her husband had an attorney file a motion to dismiss. And I argued, based on the cases that I mentioned, that no, I believe that, even though it hadn't been done before, as far as I could tell, I believe that this could be done. And the judge overruled the motion to dismiss. And that led to the first front page Columbus Dispatch story about her case, which was kind of neat. And so we went through discovery, and I eventually filed a motion for summary judgment, which is, for people who aren't familiar, it's a motion that says, these are the undisputed facts. This is the law. When you apply the law to the facts, we win, essentially is what it is. And the judge granted that motion and gave her judgment on the issue of liability. That led to the second front page Columbus Dispatch story about her case, which was, again, pretty cool. We ended up in a jury trial on the issue of damages. And the head of the Ohio Domestic Violence Network offered to serve as an expert witness. And my purpose in doing that was really to express to the jury how domestic violence cases affect all of us, not just the spouses and the kids that are involved in a specific case, but the community and the schools and the employers. It's shocking how much productivity is lost in Ohio every year to our businesses due to domestic violence. So there's all kinds of ripple effects of it that most people don't think about. But she came in and offered excellent testimony. And at the end of the trial, the jury came back with a $21.5 million verdict in her favor. And that not only led to the third front page Columbus Dispatch story, it also generated a full story in the Washington Post and a story in Time Magazine. And both of those stories are actually linked on my campaign webpage. If you go to keepjudgeking.com and look in the news tab, you can actually read both of those stories. So it's pretty interesting. So something that I resisted or was reluctant to take on, but because of my experience and my understanding of these cases, led me to take it on and ultimately make a difference for her in terms of, this was a jury saying that she had value, and the news got out, and, I can't profess to say that it made any lasting significant difference in the area of domestic violence, but I'd like to feel that it at least sent the message that these things are a bigger deal than maybe historically we have viewed them as. So I tell you all that because it informs, how I approach this topic. It informs, my experience, but I also want to make clear, as a judge, my duty is to defend the Constitution. My duty is to apply the law fairly and impartially, right? And I take that so seriously in that every domestic violence case that I have, I start with all of the protections in our Constitution, beginning with the presumption of innocence. I know that there are false claims of domestic violence, just like there are false claims of everything. But as a judge, I take my experience and I have to set aside the biases and any personal feelings that I may have. And I have to recognize that each one of these cases is unique, and they so are. Everyone has to be decided on its merits, right? And so that's a challenge. I mean, just on volume, like I said, I sit in my courtroom every morning and, I review that day's cases so that I know what's coming. I make sure that I understand the background, the context. It's not just, a number in another case. And so I'd like to think, we want our judges to have as much experience as possible, right? We want our judges to come from all different backgrounds and to bring that experience to the table and to bring it in a way that they're actually using it in the right way. Not to, have some vendetta or to, but to actually say, okay, I have a chance to make a difference. And within that role and within that context, here's how I'm going to do it. And so I'm grateful. I said earlier, I never believed mom when she said you're where you're meant to be, but it turns out, she was right. She's been gone 10 years now, but I listen to her more now than I did when she was alive. And I really honestly feel like I'm where I'm meant to be.
You were where you were meant to be. When you took on the case of that woman, I think her name was Jennifer Bailey,
Yeah,
more as if you were vicariously representing your mom. And you said something after the verdict. You said this sets a clear legal precedent that these victims are going to have recourse to a meaningful remedy. Whether Jennifer Bailey ever collects a dollar or not, that makes this decision huge. We're
yeah,
talking about a $21.5 million verdict. That has never happened before in Ohio
yeah.
because normally spouses don't sue each other for domestic violence, but most domestic violence happens in relationships, in marriages, in they happen among people who are really intimate.
Hmm. Yeah.
When you got that verdict, how did you feel?
So,
Other-
you reiterated that it was a big verdict, both in terms of the history, excuse me, the dollar amount, but Jen meant it when I first met with her, when she said she didn't care about those things. And I can tell you, one of the last things that I said to the jury in my closing argument was, I said, the insidious thing about domestic violence is that if you tell someone they're worthless often enough or long enough, they start to believe it, right? I mean, that's ultimately what this boils down to. And it's what I grew up with, it's what I saw. And so to me, the verdict was just like with Jen, I think it wasn't about the dollar amount. It was about the message and the strength of the message that says, this isn't okay, right? And here's what I see in my courtroom. So I've had this conversation. I have conversations with everybody in my courtroom. I don't know if that makes me unique, but I actually have conversations with people, right? And so at the end of a domestic violence case, just for an example, someone has entered a guilty plea, and I'm at the point of sentencing. Now, most people probably aren't familiar, but in Ohio, we have very specific law about misdemeanor sentencing. There are two purposes of misdemeanor sentencing in Ohio. One is to protect the public, the other is to change the behavior and punish the defendant. That's it. Two things: protect the public, change the behavior. And so almost every case that we have in municipal court, and not just domestic violence, I'm talking about all of our criminal cases, almost all of them have some component of a mental health issue, a drug or alcohol abuse issue, a lack of education issue, a lack of employment and financial resources issue, right? I look back at my own childhood, my dad wasn't a monster, and most, even the guilty, after the case is over, even guilty domestic violence defendants, most of them aren't monsters. Most of them are dealing with some of these underlying issues. My dad was a truck driver, lost his job when I was about 9 years old with thousands of other truck drivers due to some legislation that went through. And, after losing his job, alcohol became a problem. When my dad was sober, he was fine. When he wasn't, not so much. and I see these things repeated, not just in domestic violence cases, but in lots of other cases. And so when I apply the purposes of misdemeanor sentencing in Ohio, I have all kinds of tools to help me achieve those purposes. One of the tools is jail, right? But I've got about 12 or 15 other tools in the form of community control. And so every case that I deal with, and I assume my colleagues as well, you're looking closely at, okay, what's the problem that needs to be solved here? And for me, I'm having conversations with people because I want to understand what's really going on and what are they willing to do. One of the things I've always taught my son is, we all make mistakes, and the measure of person is what we do to correct our mistakes, right? And so municipal court, it's all misdemeanors. The worst case I could ever see would potentially involve someone serving 18 months in jail. That's the worst. So everybody in my court, I start with the presumption that these people are going to be our neighbors. They're going to be in our community. They're going to be our teachers, our bus drivers, our servers, our doctors, our whatever it is. Every one of them at the other end of their case is going to be back out, and we want them to be successful, right? And so in all these cases, it's always a conversation about, what services do you need? What tools can I bring to bear? What incentive can I provide? Whether it's a carrot or a stick. So there's always some combination of that going on. And for me, that's really what it's about. It's, I tell people all the time that I want them to be my success story, and I've actually had people just open up and say, yeah, here's my problem. Here's what I need. And, I appreciate the help. So it's kind of cool. It can be very rewarding, but it can also be very trying.
Oh, that's great. Instead of just you want to make sure you try to kill the problem from the root.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to see people as people, right? Because, life is hard. And this is, it kind of goes back to the experiences and the background that I bring to municipal court. Everybody who comes through my courtroom reminds me of somebody that I either knew or, in some cases was closely related to, or, someone that I cared about, someone that, is doing their best but needs a little help, right? And some, it's a spectrum. It's a
It is.
spectrum, never dull.
Yes.
But the goal is to see people as people and actually, have those conversations and say, all right, how can we help?
Awesome. Yeah, according to the CDC, on average, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by intimate partners in the US. During 1 year, this equates to more than 10 million women and men. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men experience severe intimate partner physical violence, intimate partner contact sexual violence, or stalking. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have experienced some form of physical violence by an intimate partner. These numbers are staggering. As a former prosecutor and someone who has, advocated for a domestic violence victim and gotten the court to move towards a position they've never reached before, what do you think when you hear these numbers?
Um, Sadly, I'm not surprised by those numbers. Again, and that's just a factor of my own life experiences and things that I've worked on. So the numbers don't surprise me in terms of what they are. I think what continues to surprise me, and again, I have to make clear, I'm not an advocate. I was an advocate in Jen Bailey's case. I spent a lifetime as an advocate. In law school, I advocated for kids in abuse and neglect cases. I'm here to call balls and strikes now, right? And so I see the numbers, but I also see that you got to drill down and see every case individually, right? If you just get caught up in the numbers, you can let yourself become cynical and think that, oh, it's, everybody's guilty or everybody's breaking the law, and you can't do that. I can't do that as a judge. I know that every case has its own unique set of circumstances. And like I said, every defendant starts with the presumption of innocence and all of the constitutional protections that our Constitution affords. When I first took the bench, my first week, one of the initial conversations I had was with the prosecutor assigned in my courtroom. And I said, look, when I was prosecuting, I didn't view it as my job just to convict people, because let's be honest, anyone can do that, right? Our job as, officers of the court, whether you're a prosecutor or particularly as a judge, your job is to protect the Constitution, to protect people's rights, and to try to accomplish justice, right? And justice isn't just convicting everybody, because if you convict everybody, you're going to convict some innocent people. And so, I appreciate having people around me, and it's not just my prosecutor. Man, I'm telling you, our court, we are honestly a people's court. Everybody that I've dealt with in 3.5 months on both sides of the bar, prosecutors, public defenders, private counsel, I have not encountered one person who isn't ultimately, while they are advocates in their ways, I have not encountered one person who has ever done anything that struck me as inappropriate or somehow contrary to what we're trying to accomplish. So that's an important thing for people to be aware of. So back to the question about these numbers. My approach to it as a judge, I think the primary function or focus for me goes back to what I talked about with the purposes of misdemeanor sentencing. Because in almost 4 months on the bench, I've had less than 5 trials. Most of our cases get resolved through plea bargains or dismissals. Sometimes a prosecutor will look at a case and recognize it's not a strong case, and it'll go out on a dismissal, right? That happens pretty frequently. And most people have lives and jobs, and they're not down at our courthouse to see this happening. So I'm happy to talk about it. It's why on my judicial Facebook page, I tell stories about things that happened, and I always start with today's courtroom moment. And I just share things that went on so that people can kind of see what we do. So for me, the numbers you're talking about, my goal when it comes to these cases is to change attitudes and change behaviors, right? And that's what the law actually specifically requires me to do. I printed it out and I have it with me that under revised code 292921, which is titled purposes of misdemeanor sentencing, right? The overriding purposes of misdemeanor sentencing are to protect the public from future crime and to punish the offender. And it says to achieve those purposes, the sentencing court shall consider the impact of the offense on the victim, right? And so that is what we've talked about already, and the need for changing the offender's behavior and rehabilitating the offender and making restitution, right? So to me, one of the things that I've repeated probably more than anything in terms in the context of these cases is I've said to people that, look, this isn't 1955 anymore, right? The attitudes need to change. We don't change our behaviors until we change our attitudes. And so I just tell people, look, if this exact same fact pattern happened between 2 strangers at a bus stop or in a parking lot, the prosecuting witness would be here in court asking me to send the defendant to jail for as long as I could possibly send them. That almost never happens in these cases in this context, because the prosecuting witness still has some hope and some love and some, the defendants all have redeeming values. These are people who still love them and want them to get help. They don't want to just see them sent to jail, right? They want them to get help. And so I have these conversations with people. I say, do you see the irony of that? That the person that should be able to count on you to protect them and not harm them is here asking me to help you, not send you to jail. And if it was a stranger at a bus stop and the same facts, it would be the exact opposite. And the light has actually come on. I've seen it. I've seen people say, yeah, you're right, and I mean, I'm still new at this, so I know I'm going to get that case where somebody comes back and I gave them, a second chance and I'll regret it. I know it's going to happen, but I have enough faith, and I'm trying to bring the tools that are at my disposal to bear in the right combination and the right proportion to change the behavior and change the attitudes. So if I'm successful, these numbers are going to go down. That's the idea.
It is. It is a tough call because you sometimes have these cases where even the victims, after a amount of time, forget the impact of the last beating,
Hmm.
and they get coaxed back
Yeah,
into that relationship.
yeah.
Now, there was one that was so close to home. It happened in Westerville. Just yesterday, the news came out that the husband of a woman who was missing last year on her birthday, she was later found months later in a wooded area dead. They
Hmm.
didn't know what happened to her. Yesterday, the man was arrested for killing her. Now, we still don't know the details of what happened. But situations such as these are very common where spouses end up killing the other one. What are the signs that people should look out for to prevent some of these tragic and fatal endings?
Well, one, I'm not allowed to talk about pending cases, so I did see that
Not
story.
that particular case,
And so, yeah, I just
generally.
want to, yeah, I understand you're not asking me to. I just want to make it clear. I couldn't comment on that case, even if you were asking me to.
Exactly.
Two, as much as I care about this topic and I have a pretty significant background in terms of my own experiences and work that I've done as an attorney, I am nowhere near an expert on domestic violence. I mean, there are so many different nuances and areas, and I mean, I'm not anywhere close to an expert. So I would have to defer to people like the Ohio Domestic Violence Network and that kind of thing. What I do know is what you were talking about. It's something that I've noticed as well, and it's something that has always concerned me. I saw it with my own mom, and you know what I said to Jen Bailey's jury was true. It's kind of that's what's going on in some of these cases. That idea that if you tell someone they're worthless often enough or long enough, they start to believe it. And so sometimes I think it's just a matter of a prosecuting witness, male, female, straight, gay. It crosses every demographic. But you see prosecuting witnesses who, for whatever reason, over enough time, enough repetition, somehow lose their sense of self. They lose their sense of self worth, and they need help getting that back. Right. But something else that goes on that I see because I hear it all the time is there is a financial dependence often. If a judge is sending someone to jail for a misdemeanor domestic violence case, that person is almost certainly going to lose their job. And a lot of times they are the primary source of income. And after that, bills don't get paid and groceries don't get bought. And, the car doesn't have gas in it. And people, these are real world problems. These are things that, these aren't academic concerns. These are things that, you know, people find themselves having to make a pretty difficult choice between continuing to be in a less than ideal relationship with someone who needs some services and some changes, or being in an untenable financial position. Fortunately, and we haven't talked about this yet, but it's a great opportunity to, we have one of the best probation services departments in the state of Ohio, if not the country, in Franklin County, Ohio. We have so many resources that we can put folks in touch with, both defendants who need some parenting classes, some, it's usually not anger management, to be honest, in these cases, from what I can tell. A lot of times it's drug and alcohol abuse. It's lack of, it's a lot of things. But there's also services that we can and do through our March program make available to literally anyone. You don't even have to have a case pending in our court to take advantage of our March program. So if we don't get anything out there, through this conversation, other than check out our March program, because if you need, whether it's some mental health services, some rent assistance, some help with an old warrant that's keeping you from accomplishing something, something that's blocking your driver's license and you can't get a driver's license. There are so many resources available through our court to actually help people get through these hurdles. Because to you or me, a small hurdle is a small hurdle, but to a lot of people, a small hurdle is insurmountable. And so yeah, there's things that we have available, and I hope people take advantage of them.
I hope so too. It seems that it's to differentiate or to divorce domestic violence from alcohol abuse, drug abuse, and financial dependency. They
Mhm.
all intersect, and
Yeah.
sometimes even with familiar relationships. Sometimes it's all about the children. They
Hmm.
want the children to still be close to their father, even though the father could be a monster to the mother, but
Yeah.
it could be an angel to the children. So
Yeah.
you have people in this difficult situation. They are caught between the hard rock
Yeah.
and the Red Sea. Mm.
Yeah, but they're very real situations, you know? And so as a judge, again, this is why I work as hard as I do. This is why I haven't heard my alarm in over 3 months, is that, every one of these cases really needs the attention that it deserves. And, it would be easy, I think, just to move on to the next one, but that's just not how I'm wired. So I'm loving it so far. I hope I get to keep doing it. And I'm happy to have these conversations with anybody who wants to. I can talk about, as you can tell, I can talk about what we do all day long.
And thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, 1 in 7 women and 18 men, according to the CDC, have been stalked by an intimate partner during their lifetime to the point in which they felt very fearful or believed that they or someone else to them will be harmed or killed. When does stalking rise to the level when a person should be concerned?
Um, that's a tough one. And I have to be careful because I'm also not allowed to give, legal advice. But, again, I don't think that's what you're asking for. You're asking just a very practical human question that, you
Yes.
know, to a lot of people, the answer may seem obvious, but to a lot of people, it isn't. And so, I think I would say to people what I say to my own kids, right? My son is 25, he's an Air Force pilot. Our daughter's 16, going on 30, she's in high school. But what I tell both of them, and I always have, is trust your instincts, right? If something seems wrong, it probably is. If something feels dangerous, it probably is. And so if your instincts are telling you that you need help with something, if your instincts are telling you that you're in harm's way, you probably are, So trust that inner instinct. And we have a process. We're fortunate to be in the community that we're in, and I mean that sincerely. When I came here 30 years ago, Columbus felt to me like a small town, and in a lot of ways it still does. But we're a big city now with big city problems, but also with big city resources, right? We're a big city, and I recognize that when I realize that I can go to Kroger or Giant Eagle in Clintonville, my community that I still feel is a small community, but almost never run into anyone I know, right? We're a big city. And so when you find yourself dealing with these sometimes scary big city issues, know that we have resources in place to deal with them. You know, there's a process for getting a civil protection order that's pretty user friendly. You don't need an attorney to go down and ask for and obtain a civil protection order if you meet the legal requirements for it. And when in doubt, like I said, trust your instincts.
Thank you. And I like the fact that you brought in your son who is serving our country, and thank you and him for his services, and
Thank
also
you.
your young daughter, because they're both in the age where women and men are trying to figure out who they are. The
Mhm.
ages between 18 and 25.
Mhm.
That's when you're fully becoming a man or a
Yeah.
woman.
Yeah.
And statistics shows that women between the ages of 18 and 24 are the most commonly abused by their intimate partners. So what can we really do to protect people in this age gap? Because
So
during that range, they're trying to either find a life partner, they're willing to compromise themselves more while
yeah.
they're still trying to find themselves.
Yeah.
This is not a legal
So
question. It's more like maybe a parent question. What
I
can we
love
do to
this question.
protect women within those, or even men within those age range, so that they
Yeah.
don't end up compromising themselves up to the point where it ends up being fatal, or maybe not even fatal, but just being abused.
Yeah. So I love this question for a number of reasons. One, as you can already tell, I care about it from the perspective of not just, an attorney and judge and former prosecutor, but a parent. Two, it lets me put in a plug for one of my colleagues, Judge Jessica DeVarga, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. But three, it has a connection to you in Granville. because when I served as law director and prosecutor in Granville, one of the things that I dealt with on a fairly frequent basis was misdemeanor cases involving Denison University students. Because as you know, Denison is a big presence in Granville. And you're exactly right. Kids between 18 and 25, they are dumb as rocks sometimes, right? And I say that lovingly because, I have two of them and I love them to death. But even my amazing son, who is way smarter than me, occasionally did dumb things during that time frame, right? And so I would see it in Granville where these kids, without the benefit of fully developed brain and thought processes, would get themselves into issues and problems that, as both a parent and a prosecutor, it seemed to me there should be a different way to help work through than just prosecuting through our regular system. So, with the help of one of my police sergeants, Dave Dudgeon in Granville, I developed an alternative plea program that is still in place in Granville, still being used. That created, it's comparable to a diversion program, dealt almost exclusively with young people, a lot of them Denison students, but not all, and tailored a solution to the specifics of a case, gave them some responsibilities, usually had them complete some educational component, almost always had them complete a community service component, because we always wanted to sort of reaffirm the notion that you're part of a community, and so you're gonna give back to your community. And if they accomplish the things that we ask them to accomplish, the case would be dismissed outright. And so Judge DeVarga is working on a new specialty court through our court in Franklin County Municipal Court to address a similar approach to young people who come through our court facing misdemeanor charges. She is working really hard to tailor that program the way that I tailored mine in Granville, but obviously on a much bigger scale. So stay tuned for that, and by all means, reach out to Judge DeVarga. I'm sure she'd be happy to talk about it, but she's doing a great job with it.
Thank you for being in, for even doing a plugin for Judge Varga. We would
Yeah,
like to have Judge Varga in this program to talk about that.
that would be cool.
Yeah. Now let's talk about the presence of gun and in relationship to domestic violence.
Hmm.
Statistics, according to the CDC, shows that the presence of a gun in a domestic violence situation increases the risk of homicide by 500%. Now, we're a nation of laws and we have the Second Amendment. How do we balance maintaining our Second Amendment right with also the intersection with the violence, with domestic violence?
Boy, that's a tough one. I'm not sure I'm qualified to really opine on it because, you know, you got a lot of smart people trying to solve that problem. A lot of them way smarter than I am. Um, the short answer is I don't know the answer to that, but I agree with you that it's a problem. It's something that we need to figure out, because you're right. The Second Amendment matters. I mean, again, I'm sworn to uphold and defend the Constitution, and all of it, not just the parts that I like. I'm sworn to uphold all of it, and so and I'm not saying I don't like any part of it. I love our Constitution. But my point is, we always have to balance, those challenges versus, the protections and freedoms that we all have. And my favorite law school professor used to say, bad cases make bad law. And he was right. There's a tendency, I think, sometimes to look for a solution to everything through legislation. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I don't know. I'll defer to the General Assembly on that stuff. When it comes to policy, not my role as a judge. But the General Assembly is the one who has to make those policy decisions. And then whatever they implement, I will follow. But if I ever decide to run for General Assembly or governor, I will absolutely be thinking about that question, I promise.
Yeah, it's a tough balance. And we also have the issue of an unhealthy attachment. I think we kind of touched on this.
Mhm.
The unhealthy attachment that most often time victims have with their abusers. In your role as a judge, even as a prosecutor, do you try to intervene to maybe admonish the victim as to dealing with that unhealthy attachment?
No, I have never admonished a victim from that perspective, and I can't imagine that I ever would, for a number of reasons. I think it would be outside of my role as a judge, first and foremost. I think it would be inappropriate, second of all. I think it would be presumptive, third of all. And then from my own experience growing up, um, I don't think that it would be really addressing anything helpful. Like I said, my dad wasn't a bad guy. My dad served his country as well in World War II. And, I could tell you a lot of good stories about my dad. I have a lot of good memories as a kid, of fishing on Lake Erie and going to Cedar Point. But I also have a lot of bad memories of, hiding in closets while he threw my mom around the room, right? And so you say unhealthy attachment, and I'm not sure I agree with that premise, because at the end of the day, we all want a family that works. We all want a community that supports us. We all want to come home and feel safe and be loved, right? That's
Correct.
that's what everybody's working toward for most of our lives, right? And so I'm not sure anybody ever finds the perfect version of it. Maybe somebody has, nobody that I know of, frankly. So there's always challenges, but what I try to talk to, again, I have conversations, right? I have these conversations with the people in front of me in my courtroom. And I talk about, I understand that, the disagreements that we have with family can get emotional. I understand that they can get volatile because more often than not, they touch on things that really matter to us, right? They touch on the things that we care about the most. And, you can have a similar disagreement with a stranger in a parking lot and it wouldn't bother you, and you get in your car and you don't give it another thought. But you can have what seems like a minor disagreement with a loved one, and for whatever reason, it sparks an emotional reaction in one or both, and it escalates to the point where police get called. And so what I try to talk with people about is the tools that we can put into place to help with that. I've told more than one person, you got to walk away from that. Again, I say it's not 1955 anymore. We don't solve these problems by putting our hands on our families. We just don't. And so what and it's not just, I'm not going to suddenly change them by telling that in my courtroom. I get that. you know so I combine that view and that admonition with the resources that I'm then applying to their case in terms of whether it's counseling classes, education. I mean, I can require people to go and get a GED if I think that's what's going to make the difference, because a lot of times just having a good paying job that allows you to support your family, Jesus, that's so valuable. I mean, you can look back over history and I know in my own case growing up, I can show you a line of demarcation about 1980, before all the truck drivers lost their jobs, after all the truck drivers lost their jobs. And that ability to just provide for your family, it matters. And so anything that we can do to help people get over these hurdles and, not have these underlying issues, my view, it helps with every case on my docket. There'll be a time when we're not the busiest court in Ohio. I believe that. I really do. We're not there yet.
Thank you. Yeah, you said before your father was a truck driver
Mhm.
and your mom was a waitress.
She was.
Yes. So you came from such a humble background. What is it like to come from such humble background and now rise to this level of reverence and prominence?
I still haven't gotten used to that, to be honest. You know, I told my wife the story. It was about my third week as a judge, and my bailiff pretty quickly picked up on the kind of person I am. And not once in my courtroom has anybody ever said "all rise," right? But as judges, we do different assignments. We rotate in different places, and one of the assignments that we have to do is hearing arraignments downstairs in courtroom 4C. And it was about my third week as a judge, and I had to take care of some things in my courtroom. And so I got downstairs, and the courtroom was already kind of busy. And as I walked in, the prosecutor there, Mike Albritton, who's a terrific prosecutor, by the way, he actually, did the full "all rise, Franklin County Municipal Court," and I literally froze in my tracks. I froze for a moment, and then I realized, he was introducing me, and then I walked to the bench and I laughed. My favorite judges in the 20 years that I've been practicing law, my favorite judges are the ones that if you met them at Kroger and had a conversation about, whatever, you would walk away from that encounter not ever knowing that they were a judge. And that's what I emulate. That's what I'm trying to be. I don't, this isn't about me. It's about the position. I'm here, I may only be here for a year, but while I'm here, it's going to be, the best year. I'm going to do the best job I can do. And if I can do it for another 6 years, I'll just keep doing it the same way. So,
The King's Court.
you got it. I love that.
You just got appointed to the court, as we keep mentioning, in March. And
I
it
did.
seems like you got appointed, and just right off the bat, you have to start running a campaign to retain and defend that seat.
Yeah.
What was that like? Because it's like
I hate it.
you're getting used to the job, you also have to run a campaign, and this is your first time of running for office.
So that part of it was actually part of the decision process. So as you know, as we've talked about, I had a great job that I really enjoyed. I enjoyed serving as law director and prosecutor in Granville. It's a great community, and it allowed me enough freedom in my private practice to do more pro bono work. And so just in terms of professional satisfaction, it was a great time in my life. And when I was first presented with the opportunity to even be considered for this appointment, uh, I paused for a little bit. But as I mentioned, my first job out of law school was as a law clerk for Judge Sadler on Common Pleas Court, and I absolutely loved it. That 2 years was invaluable because I didn't have to be an advocate in that role. My job was to help Judge Sadler get things right. Right? It was to help decide cases according to the law, and it was just absolutely awesome. Right? And so over the course of my career, I've always had it in the back of my mind that at some point, things would kind of come full circle and I would have an opportunity to be what, in my view, a common pleas judge. That's kind of what I always thought. Well, I was actually with Judge Sadler when we both learned that Judge Pollitt had passed away. And we were talking, and sort of out of the blue, she said, "Have you ever thought about municipal court?" And I laughed because I hadn't. I said, "No." I said, "But when you think about it, with my background, I grew up in Toledo. My dad was a truck driver. My mom was a waitress. I've spent the last 10 years as a municipal law director prosecuting misdemeanor cases." I said, "Why haven't I thought about municipal court? I don't know why I hadn't, it wasn't like I had this burning desire to, but then the more I thought about it, it was like, yeah, that's probably what I should be doing, right?" And so I reached out and I said, "Hey, I would like to be considered for this." Never, seriously thinking that it was going to happen necessarily. But when the call came, it was like I said, the first reaction was, "Hey, that's pretty cool." The next reaction was one of just profound responsibility. It was like the day my son was born, right? And then the third reaction was, okay, do I take this? Because there was no getting around. It was very clear that you have to run for election in November, and if you don't win that election, you're looking for a job essentially. And I don't expect, and didn't expect, and wouldn't expect Granville to sit around and wait for me to come back. I helped them find someone to take over for me who is doing a terrific job, and I knew he would, right? But here's kind of the thought process that I had. Number one, attorneys spend their entire life and never get that call to serve, right? Much less from the governor. And so you have to take that very seriously. If you're going to say no to that, you got to have a really good reason. And the reason shouldn't be because you're afraid. The second thing I thought was this. So I had a law school classmate that annoyed the crap out of almost all of us. I had a law school classmate, and if you know anything about law school is filled with a lot of type A personalities. You get a lot of overachievers in law school, right? Some with bigger egos than others, but I had a law school classmate who talked in virtually every class, just never shut up. and drove us nuts. Drove us nuts partly because he talked a lot, but he also made us feel inferior because he was smarter than we were, right? To be honest. But we came to find out that he knew that he was dying of cancer, and he knew that law school was going to be his only opportunity to be a lawyer in whatever form. And it didn't stop him from going to law school. It just meant that he approached it in a different way. And so after having the conversations with my family and my friends, the only decision I could make was, look, if I don't win an election, so be it. I can't control that. I'm going to do the best I can. I'm doing the best I can. I go out and talk to everybody, and I love my job, and I think I do it well. But at the end of the day, I can't control who people vote for. And so if I'm only going to do this for 10 months, I'm going to do it the way my law school classmate did, which is going to be the best 10 months everybody has served on, anyone ever served as a judge, right? So it really wasn't a hard decision after that. It was, okay, we may be looking for another job after January, but like Mom said, you're where you're meant to be. So either way, it's going to be fine. I will either continue doing this, which is my preference because I love it, or the next opportunity will be there, and that'll be fine too.
You are meant to be.
Yeah, you got
And
it.
you
Yep.
do your best wherever you are.
Yep.
Yes. The village of Granville, according to the Census Bureau, is over 90% white and 0.7% black. Your prior law firm, Dinsmore and Scholl, too, is also majority white when it comes to their ranks and partners and even their associates. Now, moving to Franklin County, Franklin County is more diverse. 66.8% white,
Mhm.
23.8% black. Having worked most of your career in a white space, how were you able to reconcile this change in your role as a judge in Franklin County?
That's an interesting question. I guess I've never really thought about it that way. I grew up in Toledo. Like I said, in 30 years, I've never lived more than 3 miles from where I'm sitting, which is the heart of Clintonville. I went to public schools. My son mostly went to public schools, except for a brief period. But both, elementary, middle school, and college, we both went to Ohio State. I think I don't doubt your statistics, when it comes to Granville and my old firm. But I would sort of say that they don't tell the whole story because the Granville that I know is a pretty progressive place and a pretty open-minded and open-hearted place. And the people that I worked with in Granville, um, I don't know, it's not what you would think of if all you're looking at is those numbers. My old firm is very similar. My old firm has adopted some of the most progressive policies in terms of their employees and their social positions and views. Um, so you give credit where it's due, I guess. And ultimately, as Dr. King said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And I think he was right. You and I are having this conversation on, just after Juneteenth was recognized as a federal holiday. And good Lord, so as an undergrad at Ohio State, I was a history major. I love history, and I focused on 19th century American history. Most people don't realize more Americans died in the U.S. Civil War than in all of the rest of our wars combined, right? And that was fighting for the end of slavery and the end of a way of life. And it's mind-boggling to me, as much as I know about the Civil War, and the more you know about it, the more fascinating it becomes, right? But it's mind-boggling to me that it took over 150 years for us to make that a national holiday, because that's what we jeopardize our very existence fighting for that. So, like I said, Dr. King, I think, was right when it comes to that. Things don't always happen as quickly as we might like, but I think when we take the long view, I still am optimistic that people are essentially good. People essentially want to do the right thing. They just sometimes need better leadership to get there. But I have faith.
Thank you. We are running out of this program. We can go on for another hour if you continue.
Sure.
What
Well,
is one thing
invite me
you
back.
Yeah,
I'm
what is
sorry. Go
one
ahead.
thing you would like the people of Franklin County to remember about you when they go to the poll?
If if you ever find yourself in court, no matter what reason, whether you're there as a defendant, as a witness, as a plaintiff, as a juror, if you ever find yourself in court, I think what matters most for our judicial system to function right is that you have a judge who is committed to applying the law to the facts without regard to anything else, without regard to politics, without regard to race, without regard to sex, without regard to, anything. It's why the Statue of Lady Justice has a blindfold, right? And so, what I wish people would come away from is number one, learn more about your judges, learn more about your judicial candidates. Go and there's information everywhere. We research for 2 hours before we buy something on Amazon. We read reviews, right? And sometimes we don't put that much effort into learning about our judicial candidates and our judges. But when you get good ones that are willing to work hard and willing to apply the law and be fair and, you know, give everyone a fair shake, man, I think you should support those judges. And obviously by that, I mean me. And so I hope that's what people come away with. And, I appreciate that you've got my campaign website up. I think it's an easy one to remember. Keep Judge King. By all means, check it out. Send me an email. The email on that goes directly to my phone. So you're going to reach me if you want to.
And for the people you heard from King, this is a guy that has practiced in almost every areas. He's prosecuted. He's done civil cases. And when it comes to the issue of domestic violence, he has prosecuted domestic violence criminally. He has sued civilly, and in fact, he won a landmark case in Ohio. But the choice is yours to decide whether or not to retain Judge King. Thank you, Judge King, for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure talking to you for the past hour. I hope to have you back some other time.
Thank you for having me. I will come back anytime you like.
Thank you. And for those of you watching at home or just listening to the podcast, thank you for joining us. Until next time, be safe. Bye for now.